there are three speakers, Shelly, Coral Manton and Leila Johnston. Each will speak for 15 minutes and then there'll be some short time afterwards for discussion amongst the panellists. So Shelly's going to speak first. Shelly is a digital artist who works in live coding and network music performance, and his projects explore aspects of code, data and collaboration, as well as performing at numerous algo raves and live coding events. Current collaborative projects for Shelly include the algo pop duo Algo Babes and OFFLE, which stands for Orchestras for Females and Laptops. She's currently a postdoctoral researcher at Durham University working on the HRC project Musically Intelligent Machines Interacting Creatively. So, over to you, Shelly.
That's a good start. Yeah, so I'm going to give a short talk about live coding and machine listening. As Christopher already said, I work as a performer and researcher in the area of live coding and sort of related practices. My day job right now, I'm working on this project which is called MIMIC, or Musically Intelligent Machines Interacting Creatively, which is a challenge for him to try and remember when you have to say it, which is a web platform which is aiming to make using machine learning and machine listening tools in music practices a bit easier to sort of access through sort of easy web interfaces and tools. So what we're going to talk about today, I don't know how many people in the room know what live coding is. Cool, so I'll talk about what live coding is, and who knows what machine listening is. Great, cool. So I'll talk a bit about that, and then depending on time, because I always talk too much, I'll talk about some projects that I've done using live coding and machine listening. So what's live coding? Live coding is essentially a performance practice that involves writing and editing code on stage for making music and visuals or other types of media. It's not really very strictly defined, and it encompasses like quite a range of practices and styles. So it's like, one thing to say is it's not a style of music, but it's a way of making music or other types of media. This is sort of like a standard setup of a performer sitting on a stage. We always try and project the code behind us, so you can you might not be able to understand necessarily the code, but you get a bit of an insight into what's going on in the process. So sort of like revealing those processes of like editing and listening and iteratively changing code as the music flows is sort of part of the practice. So just to give you a couple of video examples, just to make that a bit clearer. This is, sorry, just change the projector quickly. This is Alexandra Cardenas, who's sort of a well-known live coder on the scene, who was first in Mexico and now in Berlin. And she's using a program called Super Collider, which is sort of like a modular synthesizer that you code. So this is sort of like the experimental side of live coding. Let's try that again. This is another example, just to show you the other sort of side of live coding, which is Alex and his duo Canute. So this is from an algorave, which is like dance music style of live coding, and it's playing with someone who plays with an electric drum kit and live coding. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. The other side of what I'm going to talk about today is about machine listening. So machine listening is essentially to do with extracting data from audio and using it to find out various things about the audio. So sort of like the most common use of machine listening, or one you might know about most, is speech recognition. But what we're doing in our project is to do with musical machine listening. So in that case, you might want to use data extraction to find out various things about the music. So a simple example would be a pitch detector. So you have a sound file, you run pitch detection on it, you can use that to, say, transcribe the melody of the piece of music. In performance, a way that you might want to use it is, say, you're using you're performing with a computer and you're playing with an acoustic performer. Maybe you want to know what key they're playing in, you might want to know what tempo they're playing in, and you could use that to feed into your computer music software so that you can play with them in a better way. And then the sort of more data-y side, I suppose, of machine listening would be musical information retrieval, which is about finding patterns in large sets of audio data. So maybe you have like a data set of music by Bach, and you want to know what like common chord transitions he's using, for example. So often this is sort of like the first step before then you would use the sort of more complicated machine learning algorithms to then do some deeper analysis on that data. Just to tell you a bit about like how I got into this sort of way of working, I've been live coding since about 2012 and doing other sort of various computer music practices before that. I used SuperCollider, which is a program that the first video was using, which you can use for live coding, but it also like has, it's like a very broad audio programming language where you can do probably anything you would want to do with audio in it, so you can also do machine listening with it. I'm really interested in improvisation and collaboration, so a lot of the work I do is like either collaborating, improvising with other people with live coding, or building software for collaboration in various ways. So I've worked both with other live coders or with acoustic musicians, sometimes performing across networks, so with people in other places in the world. And I'm also really interested in data and how that can be fed into music systems. So I've worked a little bit with like sonification. This is a project I did a couple of years ago working with a computational chemist who was, she was working on Alzheimer's, so she was making like simulations of how proteins in the body react to particular drugs, which is like a really complex thing to visualize and spot what's going on. So she was interested in how sound might feed into that as well. That was probably the most like data-y project I've done, but a lot of the other projects are using data in it. So I sort of like put this all sort of under the bracket of like improvising with algorithmic systems because it seems like a umbrella that works. How much time do I have?
So, about 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. Okay, so I was going to talk about 3 projects. Probably I don't have time to talk about all of them. So I started like maybe using sort of machine listening in deeper ways in 2015 with a project called Block, which was about like building an artificial voting system where the system itself had like preferences about what kind of music it wanted to hear, and I was inputting the performer audio into that system, and it was like voting. There was essentially like a lot of agents which each had particular preferences about what they wanted to hear, and they would vote, and whoever had the most votes would get their audio pushed the loudest. But their preferences were kind of changing over time as well, according to like what was being chosen. So I'm going to skip over that one. That's what the visuals look like, voting systems, live coding. That's the system architecture. So like graphs and diagrams. And then, yeah, 2017, I was thinking about how when you're improvising, you sometimes get stuck into like ruts of doing sort of same and similar things. So I wanted to design a system which would like push me out of that and at least like tell me when I'm doing the stuff that I always do. So I made this like visualization where I like analyzed like I had like tons of recording and code files from like 5 years of performing, and so I analyzed my database and tried to find essentially the common spectral types of information in my own database of music. And then it was sort of like trying to, during the performance, it was giving me like analyzed like...
Sorry, feedback there.
Good to hear it twice. Yes, so it was like flashing orange if I was doing something that I do a lot of the time, and flashing blue if it was something that's like not common in my past archive of stuff that I do. And it was also sort of doing some text analysis, so it was doing predict by partial match, so it's like, given this bit of text, what's the most likely bit of text to come next? So that was sort of giving me a sort of like code analysis of like, what's the type of code I would probably type after the thing I just typed. And the last project, which is the most recent project I've worked on, I'm kind of like interested in how algorave and live coding is a bit like algorithmic punk music. So I thought it would be fun to do a performance like that reflected that in sort of more obvious ways. So I made a piece which is sort of algorithmically remixing Riot Girl music. So Riot Girl is like feminist punk music of the early 1990s. So I did an analysis of a huge database of Riot Girl music, and then during the performance I used some algorithms to search for pieces of audio that have particular audio characteristics. So I might say like, give me chunks of audio that are really loud, or chunks of audio that are like really noisy. And then I can use those as part of the live coding performance to essentially improvise with. So I can make like new patterns and like rhythmic patterns out of that data. So it's kind of like stupid machine listening. There's like nothing clever about any of that algorithms, but it kind of made me think like, if you were going to make algorithmic punk music, what would it be? Yeah, so that's that. And yeah, so I think there's all sorts of questions we could ask there about whether it's okay to appropriate film music in that way. But yeah, maybe that's for the discussion later.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Leila Johnston, who is an artist and who currently works at Sheffield Site Gallery as their first digital. Oh right, okay. I'm going off here online. What are you doing now? Maybe you should do the intro.
I'll do a brief intro.
Yes, okay.
The rest might be relevant. I think it doesn't like this projector. Oh, my screen's flickering. Looks like it wants. Let's try it. Ah, there you go. Oh, no. Okay. If I hold the cable there, pinch it, that might be okay. Alright, hopefully this will hold. If not, I'll just swap projectors. Okay, so this is, I think, exactly 10 minutes long, so I'm going to basically read it to keep it to time. So hopefully that'll be okay. Ooh.
Oh,
Is that fire alarm?
yeah.
Shit.
Yeah, I don't think we've got yeah.
I think you have to go halfway.
Yeah, we'll have to come back.
It's nothing to be concerned about.
Oh.
It's only dry ice that somehow managed to get through the system.
Okay.
Go off in a moment.
Alright.
See flames out the door.
Okay, thank you.
Don't worry.
Are you happy talking
I
over?
can talk over it, yeah.
We can delay things. Oh, it's okay. Good.
So, okay, just a quick intro then, given the other ones.
Yeah, no problem.
Right, thanks. So my name is Leila Johnston. I'm a writer and editor at the moment. I used to be an artist and a digital art curator, but now I basically just do editing and writing things. But, you know, never say never, maybe something will come up. From 2012 until till this February, I was working with performance and media stuff, doing videos, photos, sounds, different kinds of cameras, LED panels, lots of things with those, and Raspberry Pi to display the media on these LED panels. I work with dancers as well, we'll talk about in a minute. I'm the kind of the token non-algo raider on this panel, Alex described me as, so there will be no algo raider content in this talk. Yes, I like doing things you're not supposed to with technology. This is an Instagram simulator I made in BBC Basic for the BBC Micro a few years ago, and this was when I, oh, that hasn't loaded properly, but there's a, oh no, there we go. It's a drawing machine that we rickrolled as part of a residency. It's literally just drawing a picture of Rick Astley's face over a period of several hours. And this is a Nyan cat, if anyone remembers that, Nyan cat, making a thermal printer, Nyan, for 45 seconds or whatever it was. That was my first residency in 2012. And I think my interest in doing things you're not meant to with tech has kind of evolved into thinking about tech in ways you're not really supposed to over the years, which we'll see. So my first proper AI residency was in 2017, and it was an organisation in Cambridge called Collusion. Do you know Collusion? No, they're really cool. I recommend looking them up. They do lots of things that sort of introduce artists to technology and support artists in various ways to experiment with tech. Really, really exciting stuff. And I got a free place on their intensive AI for Artists summer school. And then I got the follow-on R&D funding. And this project in particular had a significant philosophical aspect, because as part of the project they introduced us to a group called the Centre for the Future of Intelligence at the Leverhulme Trust in Cambridge, which is really an amazing organisation with philosophers and technologists and just kind of really great thinkers all working around artificial intelligence and what's going to happen in the future of that. So I talked to them a lot and worked with them. And during this residency I became really interested in the idea of a predictive AI, and I formulated the notion that if you had enough data about the present moment, then you could in theory predict the next moment. So a bit like chaos theory or something, but kind of, or weather forecasting on a grand scale. If you know enough about what's likely to happen, then you can probably tell what's going to happen next. And it turns out there's a philosophical allegory for this, which is called the Laplace's demon. And so I thought, well, why don't we make the Laplace's demon in AI form? And I started thinking about an AI fortune teller and how great it would be if it could take the form of a mermaid, because they're a bit tricksy. And I work a lot with dancers, and I love working with water, so it all kind of came together. In my vision for this, I thought, and obviously I've been doing lots of stuff with LED panels and Raspberry Pi and animation, so I thought, well, maybe we could have the mermaid discovered a kind of sentient AI has evolved, and it's under the road in the cabling and appearing on a sort of screen. But it's been interfering and using its powers to interfere with this road sign outside on Main Street. This kind of says, you know, roadworks, expect delays. And visitors to the installation would be confronted with this road sign, which is constantly being interrupted and glitched by the AI mermaid, who is trying to persuade you to take up her fortune-telling services. So there's kind of palms and pictures of mermaids and stuff just kind of flashing in every so often. And I made quite a lot of this, and there's music and everything. And yeah, so you can enter, obviously the fortune-telling tent would then be a workman's tent, which you sometimes see, those kind of red and white stripy things. And then you go in and have take advantage of the mermaid's palm reading services. And your relationship with her would affect her BIOS as a machine as well. So I was very interested in this interaction between people and machines in a way that makes us more sympathetic to the machine, because I feel like that might be the key that we're missing out on. So you are thinking more about what we have in common with the machine, which I'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, perhaps fortunately, I didn't get the next bit of funding, and this project was aborted, which becomes a thing. So after that residency, I was invited to be the AI Apocalypse Artist in Residence at an amazing place in Bedford, if you ever get a chance to go, called the Centre for the Critical Study of Apocalyptic and Millenarian Movements. It's absolutely fascinating. It's based at the Panacea Society Museum, which is a museum where, until fairly recently, there were the remnants of a 1920s cult, a sort of apocalyptic cult of wealthy middle-aged women who, yeah, kind of came to this house and started, it was, if you imagine it was after the First World War, and everyone was kind of looking for answers, and this little religious sect evolved around the predictions of very influential, slightly older woman who lived there, who claimed to be getting messages from God. The cult is now defunct, but it was founded by this woman who called herself Octavia, and she came up with these constant predictions. Every day she had messages from God that she would share with the people who lived in the house with her. She herself was inspired by the ancient soothsayer Joanna Southcott. Has anyone heard of Southcott's box? Joanna Southcott's box. So it's in a Monty Python sketch if you're interested, but there's a famous box that this group tried to get opened, and there's a whole thing about you have to have 12 priests present or something. Anyway, they had the custody of this ancient box of predictions, this organisation, and I got hold of some of the other predictions that this Joanna Southcott character had written, and a friend supplied me with some code that mashes together different texts and creates new sentences and sort of learns to speak. So this is your algorithm bit. And so I combined Joanna Southcott's oldie worldly predictions with a recent document from, I think it was 2017 I did this project, 2017-2018, which was the Scientist's Letter to Humanity. It's a very technical document. You might have seen it's quite thick, and it's got lots of diagrams and lots of information about technical terms like ozone and appealing for action against climate change. And some of the lines that were spewed out by the algorithm as it mashed together the old world, like fire and brimstone warnings about the end of the world, with the climate scientists' words, were really funny and interesting, and Cool. So I decided that I would make the best of these new predictions into pixel graphics. So I don't think I have a picture of here actually. And they, oh yeah, you can kind of see them around. I made this like modern day priest's style, like a suburban priest's outfit. And the pixel graphics became part of the costume. So I kind of sewed that to the best of my ability into the suburban priest. And it turns out that the 1920s prophet had one friend, because she was a bit unusual in her personality. She wasn't the most personal individual, as you can imagine. But she had a friend who was a crow, and so I thought, well, I can do something with that. So I made a robot crow in her honour, and I concealed a camera in it, and I attached it to a colour tracking program, which would then watch the LED panels while I played animations of various digital apocalypses inspired by the algorithmically mashed up sentences. So it was a kind of an apocalyptic cuckoo clock, if you can imagine, but the crow is watching the screen, and the screen is showing the terms and the various apocalypses. I've done quite a few residencies with professional dancers. This is Rombert, the leading contemporary dance company in the UK. I was their first digital artist in residence with them, and did lots of stuff with thermal video. And this work has got me wondering whether there could be a new kind of creative technology inspired by the approach of contemporary dance. I started calling this physical empathy, a way of experiencing tech that can take its starting point as the physical, gestural, time-bound. And this goes back to the BIOS stuff with the mermaid that I was thinking about before. There's a common ground, I think, that hasn't been explored very much. Computers are like bodies. They draw energy to move, they make noises, they generate heat, and they have very similar material demands to living beings. We're all part of the material world after all. Dances are really fascinating to me. I think they offer a really good insight into this new approach to technology, because they're very interested in technology, but they're very different sorts of people to technicians. So their interest comes from a completely different place. And I started looking at machines, digital culture, and the entire physical dimension of technology through the senses of those whose locus of understanding of the world resides not only in their verbal language, but in their physical vocabulary too. Last year, the Derby Court invited me to contribute to their virtual reality season. Now, I don't make VR work, so that was a good challenge. But there is something more exciting to me than putting a real me in a temporary virtual world that's been generated for my own entertainment, such as we get in VR. So I started suggesting to them that we do a sort of inverse VR, an opposite VR, where you have a kind of abstracted sense of yourself surrounded by these permanent, perplexing digital worlds that get along fine just without you. So the digital that exists without you needing to be there interests me. So I made these kind of windows that were a little bit obscured, that made you feel like you're outside of tech, because I think a lot of tech now is designed to create an illusion, and I sort of always want to get back to that, what's real though. So yeah, I wanted to make technology force us back into our bodies, because that is the only real thing, make us aware of the worlds that are not designed for us. If the digital space is real, then what are we? We're outsiders looking in through these windows, and I'm interested in how artists working with technology might show or make us feel like outsiders to a real technical world that is a physical, genuine thing that actually exists. It's not just a cloud, rather than immersing us in the centre of an artificial one. And that's it from me. Thank you. Cheers.
Take my chances with how in date this biography is. So, Coral Manton is an interdisciplinary artist with interests in audio-visual performance, live coding, game development and virtual reality. She performs regularly at algo raves and has been involved in numerous digital arts collaborations across disciplines. She's an advocate for women in technology and coding, and has an interesting project that she's going to tell us about on women reclaiming AI. And Coral is also a researcher and developer at IDAT at the University of Plymouth. So over to you, Coral.
Yeah, that's fairly up to date. I'm now actually lecturing creative computing at Bath University, so I run the games pathway of the course, so I have to admit that I generally teach a 90% male room to make games, but that's something we're sort of working on. Yeah, I just added that there to prove our live code, which is a slightly silly thing to do because I'm actually the algoraver in the room who's not going to talk about live coding or performance, so sorry about that. But what I am going to talk about is a project called Women Reclaiming AI, which I started with my collaborator Birgitta Arger, who's not here today. So I'm sort of going to be focusing on this. So the kind of things that we do, we're particularly interested in conversational systems. We're interested in the commercial pursuits of humanizing kind of these AI systems, and we've done quite a lot of kind of strange, weird, provocative artworks around this. We're planning a new one at the moment, but our most current one is Women Reclaiming AI. So what's the issue here? So AI, for most people, looks like this. This is a Google image search of AI. It's blue, there's lots of networks, there's brains, there's robots, it's kind of scary. This is AI in the media. So for the average person, AI doesn't really mean anything. It's some sort of godlike figure that we can't understand, and for that reason we can't interrogate. And actually, I was sort of thinking, how true is this? And I was invited on a panel at a United Nations conference about gender and AI, and I nipped into the main room, and they had these big robot godheads that were all pixel mapped with all of this blue swirling around, because they were trying to portray AI, and I thought, oh dear, I don't think they're ready for my presentation. So 8 billion, this number refers to the number of kind of conversational AI systems that is predicted that we're going to have by 2023. So this is a growing technology, it's a growing market. The voice is kind of seen as the next kind of big interface. But the issues are that women are underrepresented in these companies around. This is actually women working in technology-based roles. In machine learning it drops again, so Facebook and Google, 19, 17%. And then if we just look at Google, that 2.5% then relates to women of colour. So then, so if you sort of think about representation, it just gets worse and worse and worse, especially when you sort of think about intersectionality. So, voice assistants, what are they? So the first one, that side, Domino's Pizza. Hey, Domino's, I would like a pizza. What kind of pizza would you like? I'd like a pepperoni pizza. And that's one that we come across a lot. A lot of shops are trying to integrate these now. ASOS is working on one, so you can sort of say, I'm going to my ex's wedding, I want to look hot, or something like that, and it will help you. So, and then the next one, Showice is Microsoft's social chatbot that's currently in China. And this one's really interesting, because Showice has had 30 billion conversations so far, with 660 million users, and the average conversational turn is 27, so that's actually quite a lot. Count when you speak to someone you don't really know, how many times you back and forth. That's huge. And Microsoft actually proudly say on their website that people have proposed to Showice and fallen in love with her. But really, you're not falling in love with Showice, you're falling in love with Microsoft, and you're growing like a really massive data set, and it's quite problematic. Then we have new robots coming out, robots with these kind of conversational systems that help in your house, and then obviously the sex robots, and actually Real Robotics have created an app. If you can't afford a sex robot, you can kind of customize your own woman and have an AI back and forth conversation with it. Although, before we get too scared, This is most of our kind of everyday conversations with our voice assistants. We say something, sorry, I can't help with that. Well, there's lots of reasons for that in terms of the voices that they change it on, but I haven't got enough time. So there's lots of activism online, lots of hashtags, lots of stuff going on Twitter. Although Amnesty International did a machine learning kind of Twitter analysis of abuse based on journalists and MPs who are female in the UK, and they found out that these kind of women in positions of power could get an abusive message about every 30 seconds. And then if you look at MPs like Diane Abbott, who's a black MP, she gets over half of these. So these platforms are toxic places for women. And then Microsoft's other kind of conversational system, Tay, was trained on Twitter. Now Microsoft will say that Tay did get sort of trolled, but Twitter reflects us right back at ourselves. You know, that's what we're dealing with here. We have a data set that looks like the people who are building the data set. So Tay, within a day, became a racist and a misogynist and had to be taken down. So lots of cool stuff going on. Women in Wikipedia, I always like to talk about. Only 15% of the biographies on Wikipedia are women. And I looked this up, and this number hasn't got any better, really, so I didn't change the date on the slide. And all of this compounds into the fact that we're baking bias into these systems, not just conversational systems, facial recognition systems, any kind of these AI systems. When we don't have representative teams working on them, we just create bias systems. And also the fact that companies like IBM are saying they're releasing a fairness toolkit, like we're going to make data bias fair by having this balance sheet approach to data, is becoming even more problematic. And I'll rant about that later if you want me to. So this is a UNESCO report called I'd Blush If I Could, which is based on Siri's response. And Siri, remember, in America is female. Oh, I'll just activate Siri. So basically, if you said to, you're a slut, if you reply, I'd blush if I could. And these are the kind of back and forths between there. And there's a lot of activism happening on this, and a lot of these systems are being rescripted. But the fact that they left to kind of be used by users around the world in this manner is really problematic. So what did we do? We started a project called Women Reclaiming AI. Recently we've got Arts Council funding, which has allowed us to have branding that we're really happy with. But we kind of started off, me and Bea, just kind of travelling around doing workshops for nothing, essentially. Just we thought it would be kind of an important thing to do. And we developed a kind of shared platform for writing and editing. So via these workshops, women could talk about, you know, kind of develop a collective intelligence really on what it is to be a woman, what it is to be a feminist, and try and put this into a chatbot as a protest. And actually at this first workshop, one of the things that a woman said that has stuck with me ever since is, I'd really like a female voice in my home that wasn't constantly available. And things like that are really, really important to kind of, I guess, most women out there and the kind of the lives that we lead. So yeah, and actually in a way there is a performance element here, because at the end of the workshop everyone kind of performs with the Google Home. We're misusing the Google Home. We are working on an open source version, so there is kind of a performance element. And we've been travelling about, we've been lots of places. We were at the Barbican for AI and Human. We were recently at Ars Electronica in Austria, where we've actually got a voice assistant that you can go and talk to, as well as an artefact if you're not able to do the workshops. So while I was at Ars, I saw a lot of female robots. If anyone's not aware of Ars Electronica, it's like a big digital arts festival. I also saw a lot of performances that say they use AI, but didn't really explain how or why. And I also saw a lot of women's faces used in performances, AI driven again by, and the developers, the artists behind them were men. I think this is really problematic. So, and actually I also met someone from Google there, weirdly, at a party, and he asked me if you had, if someone from the Midwest conservative Christian area of America had a voice assistant, what would they sound like? What should they sound like? And I think he was trying to get me to say probably what you've already designed. But I think the thing I realised is there isn't a personality that fits everyone. And why do we need voice assistants with personalities? I don't need Alexa to tell me a joke. So maybe this is just something that needs to be left in fiction, as the voice interface is useful for inclusion and things like that, but maybe we just leave this one. And what's even more concerning about this is while we were there, there was a document leaked from Apple to The Guardian, and you can read this on their website, and it kind of gives you all of the kind of pointers when they write Siri. With this one I find really interesting. Siri's true origin is unknown, even to Siri, but definitely wasn't a human invention. So users of Siri should never think that Siri was made by people, which is really problematic. So my next kind of, I guess, provocation, and this is, I think, to you as kind of artists and performers, maybe researchers, whatever, is that if you do want to use female forms, then let's remember that throughout history, we've been dehumanised, objectified, sexualised, and around the world, women are still treated as property. Why not make your teams or the people you work with majority women? And then if we're going to kind of script these personalities that default to female personalities, let's make these teams majority women, and I think that's the same for robotics, and kind of use of female representation as well. And I'm prepared to argue this is a provocation. Next project. I think me and B are going to take on tech fetishism and masculinity. At Ars Electronica this year, I've never seen so many robot arms in my life, and ridiculous uses of like amazingly expensive robot arms. Even at the awards ceremony, they had this huge robot arm that's probably, you know, 6 figures with these trays on it, and they've got all the awards and the robot arms just going like this. What is going on? So this is our next kind of thing. We're going to think about kind of tech fetishism and kind of how we can inject some humour, because one of the things about women playing AI is when you speak to our chatbot, it's very funny, into these spaces. I have no long idea how long that was. Yeah. Please check out our website, womenreclaimingai.com, and if you want to become part of the community, you can see our upcoming workshops on that.
Yeah.
So would the panellists like to come back just to field some?
Should I just turn this off?
Okay, so I think I'll just start with one that sort of brings things round to the theme of the panel and then open the floor to other questions. So kind of picking up on some of what was in your presentation there, Coral, you're taking obviously a very kind of critical take on this sort of contemporary boom in AI in the sort of commercial tech sphere, and it has, I was talking to Shelly about this yesterday, but clearly become a bit of a kind of buzzword that stands in for so many different things, and at the same time has a very long history that goes back to kind of, you know, cybernetics in the 40s and 50s. So I guess I'd just like to start by asking you whether you think this term is useful for what you're doing. I can kind of get a sense of, in terms of your work, Coral, that you're taking a kind of critical approach to technology, but say with your work, Shelly, where you're working with machine listening, in what sense do you find AI a useful concept to be working within? In your work, Leila, you've got a more kind of philosophical take with the sort of Laplace's demon. It's working in a different way. So perhaps you could just speak to that to start. Whoever wants to take it first.
I have to talk first. Sorry. Yeah, I think I was saying to you last night actually that I think most often the term AI is useful when you're trying to explain technology to people that's maybe quite technical and uses lots of like technical jargon, and it's like a way in to start talking about what it is you're doing. That people can grasp onto, like, okay, I have a vague idea of what AI is, and then you can sort of start to go deeper and talk about it that way. But I don't know, I don't ever frame the work that I do as AI, to be honest, because it's not, I mean, I don't even really use machine learning algorithms, which I suppose are like the basis of AI these days. So yeah, I find it quite difficult, and it doesn't really have a fixed definition anyway. So like a broad base of like the type of work that it is.
Are we both down the line? So I guess I am. So I am thinking very much about AI in a commercial sense, I think, and and how that becomes problematic when people don't really understand what it is, and it's kind of a concept, really, more than a, you know, in my mind, more than a specific technology, and when you kind of report something in that sense, people feel that they can't kind of question it or interrogate it. And I think that's definitely interesting when you look at kind of conversational systems that use personality. And let's remember, a lot of this personality is just scripted just by people. You know, it's not natural language processing is the machine learning, the understanding. A lot of the responses are just scripted by humans. So in that context where people put trust and faith in things, and I have had a few interesting meetings recently after meeting with a Guardian. Someone there said, what should the Guardian sound like? Like, that's amazing, what a ridiculous thing that we've got to suddenly start sort of thinking about. But these trusts, and also there's been some really interesting white papers on when you ask the Google Home a question, and then that question comes up different from a Google search. So suddenly we remove mechanisms by which we can question and interrogate things. And I think that is one of the problems with at least the reporting of the term is this bit thing that's too big and you couldn't possibly understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think there's like one of the things that I'm trying to do is always take away the deception and or point it out. Like with that Laplace's demon thing, I was trying to show that actually the Laplace's demon is quite a negative thing, and you know, there's quite a lot of, I feel like technology is trending towards lying all the time, and and it's kind of our job as creatives or you know, philosophers or thinkers about this stuff to find the truth and sort of say, well, is this really what's being described? You know, there's a talk that I do about Terminator and the Terminator films, because the Terminator image is used all the time, and if anyone mentions AI, you'll probably notice. And I do a talk about how worried should we be, what actually happens in Terminator, who are these people, you know, what's the threat that's presented, and how realistic is it? And it's sort of, the culmination is that the code that the Terminator sees when every time he thinks about something, he sees all his thoughts in front of his eyes in his heads-up display, is all just lifted out of an Apple II magazine from 1984 called Nibble, and it's literally like machine code. Yeah, and you can see him like looking up his RAM disks and like changing equate directives and stuff. Just, it's all real code from really boring programs for 8-bit computers. But it's amazing. But that's the kind of thing. Like, there's so much deception around this stuff. And like I was saying to Alex, that this is the first time I've been able to talk about AI, and I've done, I think, 6 residencies about AI, and no one's ever thought maybe Leila knows about it, because I approach it from such a like raw way. I think I just sort of say, I'll be the Grace and Perry of AI or whatever. Just like, let's just have fun, let's make it colourful, let's talk about what it might mean to real people. And that's such an unpopular approach. It's quite alarming, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, that there's like an expectation that if you talk about AI, you should talk about it in this sort of like mystifying, ungraspable way.
Yeah.
Do you think people in the sort of commercial tech sphere have something to learn from live coding? Because obviously the ideas of sort of deception and transparency are at the heart of like showing screens to audiences, and that's kind of quite a key debate now in AI, how to implement more transparency for users to understand how systems are understanding them. Is that taking it too far to say that they could take a cue from live coding?
I think it's like a really interesting question. Like, part of the research that project that I'm working on, another part of the team have been working on like live coding, working with Google's TensorFlow machine learning systems, and it's like, I find it quite challenging, because those algorithms are so black box and you don't know what's going on inside of them, and you can't really train your algorithm yourself because they're trained on, you know, immensely huge databases of music, which is the only reason that they work. So I find it actually quite challenging to like reconcile live coding and machine learning together, because it seems like sort of polar opposites in terms of tech. It's like you can understand live coding and it's on show and we're showing you what's happening. Even if you're using machine learning algorithms, even the coder doesn't know what's going on inside the machine learning algorithm. So, yeah.
No, I agree with that, and I think also in terms of like transparency in AI and quite specific AI tools, it's also transparency in the data sets. So it would be kind of, live coding and then also showing people your sample library as well, or something like that, definitely. But I think the ethos of live coding is something I think that all tech industries, to be fair, could take something from. But I also think when it's interesting raising that the kind of what doesn't quite sit right about these algorithms that are so complicated in live coding, because there is a lot of performance, because AI is a buzzy word, and I noted this at ours, there was an AI music festival, I said blah, 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 performance, and AI, and no real kind of sense of what that means. And then I was thinking, because someone pointed me to an article that was in the Financial Times saying that only so out of the companies in London that claim they're using AI technologies in their products, and that's not just like normal things we all use. There's a lot of AI here potentially. 60% of them aren't. They're just saying that they are. So, and I sort of wonder that in terms of performance, or are we using it in a way that we really understand, or are we using a tool like some kind of I don't know, image recognition or something like that, and using a tool, but rather than saying the tool that we're using, we're just going to say we use AI.
So, got about 5 minutes if anyone wants to ask a question from the floor.
I've got a lot of questions for Coral. Honestly, not enough time. When you talked about you want like an Alexa without personality, I think I just wanted to know like what does that look like? Like a voice recognition thing without personality, without gender, because surely once it's like talking to you, it's going to become gendered in some, like to one extent or another. But also the thing that's being sold to you isn't like the access, like pragmatism of it, it's the personality. So I don't know how, like, so what does that look like?
I do think that is a really interesting question, and I think that because also there's been some stuff coming out about a non-gendered AI voice, which I just do not buy at all, because as soon as it's other, non-dominant, it's other and then it's feminized. But also, I think in terms of personality, I guess my sort of vision for it is if for a lot of what we ask, say, Alexa for is, will you play this piece of music? Will you turn on the TV? Will you turn on the lights? And it might just say yes or okay. And even yes and okay has a sense of personality. And also, as humans, we see like a face in a cloud and we want to make friends with it. That's just something about how our brains work that these kind of, I guess, the companies are playing on essentially, and in terms of selling us things and selling us ideas. I think that kind of removing all of the stuff about jokes and family and you know, like getting your kids to ask it what Santa's bringing and stuff like that. I just wonder whether, or maybe we take it out for now, maybe even until we've actually had a critical debate about it, and a critical debate that end users are involved in. So one of the things I noticed when I was at this conference is I said, if you've made technology that only really works for the powerful in the world who essentially have first access to buying it, but then leaves lots of other people behind, how about you just don't release it? And that was like a tumbleweed went past. Do you know what I mean? So, but already these systems are pervasive. So just, I guess something for now is if we could just potentially remove some of the personality from them.
You will have a question.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you. I really enjoyed all the talks. I know they were very interesting. Thanks for coming. So that was great. I have a question which is particularly for Coral, just because it came up in her talk, but I would also be happy if anyone else wanted to chime in. Which is, you mentioned IBM's fairness tool, and you said you kind of have some kind of things that you're not happy about that. And I just wanted to kind of slightly push back on that, in as much as, although I don't think tools like that are kind of long-term solutions, I think more of a long-term solution is, like you say, having greater diversity in the teams that are kind of developing these technologies to begin with. But I do think it is helpful to have tools that kind of existing developers can kind of, who don't have expertise in kind of, maybe what different forms of bias are, a tool that kind of flags that up for them, and kind of, can improve their working processes in order to remove these kind of issues. And I think that's a good thing. So I'd be interested in your response to that and why you might disagree.
I think it's also, for me, it's kind of selling an idea of fairness and unbiased data. And that's problematic, especially when we think about a company like IBM, which is a huge company, a very complicated company with a very troubled history. So for me, it's kind of then, well, work on your teams first. And I was in a talk with someone from IBM, and there was a guy from Black Tech London there, and this guy from IBM, he started by saying, we're engineering the bias out of data, and I've never heard someone laugh so hard in my life. And I think it's kind of, and of course, trying to look for fairness in data is important, but it becomes again commercialised and something that we can sell. And you don't need to worry about this anymore, because we've checked this data and it's fair, stamped fair. Whereas what we actually need to do is always be able to interrogate. And even a balance sheet approach to data is problematic in itself, because I was listening to a research from Edinburgh talking, and he was saying, in credit scores, women are disadvantaged because there's more data about men. If you take something like crime statistics, there's way more men in prison than there are women. If you have a balanced approach then, just in the gender terms, it's still poor towards women. So we actually need to really think about all of these data sets as we do them. So I think in terms of working towards and really thinking about fairness kits is really good. I think when we say we're engineering the bias out, or we're kind of making kind of a data set that we as, I guess a company, rather than, I don't know whether it be government or people or whatever, have stamped as fair. We're going to stamp this as fair, therefore it's fair, don't worry about it, this is fair. And that's my problem with it, really.
Sure. Thanks.
Yeah, I think there's just something super cynical about not dealing with the human problem first. I mean, it's like, if you have a problem with bias in your engineering team, train your engineering team. Don't be like, oh, we've solved the problem because we've made an algorithm. It's like, you haven't solved the problem, you still have a biased engineering team. So.
Yeah. And understanding, of course, that data is inherently biased. So when we all look at data, we'll go, how is this data biased? Yeah. And that should be the first question.
Any further questions from the floor?
I'm just thinking, I don't know, my conundrum is I want to sort of input into that data by sort of using interfaces and apps and stuff. But there's always the risk as well. So I was at a talk the other day, it was Caroline Creano Perez talking about the data bias against women, and basically they were talking about the Apple Health Act, that they didn't talk about periods or anything, because it was all men that designed it. Yeah. And I wanted to sort of input as a person. I know I haven't got any control over what team designs the app that I use, but as a person, can I input into that data by using stuff more? Is that a thing? Am I doing that? And what is the risk that I'm putting myself at to sort of advertisers who then might target me if I'm using an app like that? I don't really know. I didn't know what your thoughts are on that. If I want to sort of input my data, is there a risk to me in that situation? It's not really. Yeah, I guess I just wanted your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't know what the answer to using some like health app as well, and she was pregnant, and there was like no switch that you could switch to say that you're currently pregnant, and so all of your statistics would be different. And so it was just like constantly like telling her she was on the verge of having a heart attack or something. Her heart rate was higher because she was pregnant. And it's just like, I just find it utterly bizarre that someone who's designing one of those apps wouldn't like think about that. But it's not bizarre because it's men. So it's like,
The idea that if you use it more, maybe you're helping to, like, I think that's what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
If I keep using it more, then maybe I'll sort of sway the data a bit, and it will make them. But then you think about things like there was a story in The Guardian a few months ago about like the way that the world is designed for men, basically, and how that's damaging women by, you probably all saw the seatbelt thing was an example, wasn't it?
Yeah,
That the seatbelts had to be redesigned. And and obviously using a seatbelt that is not designed for you will possibly result in you dying or being very badly injured. So it's hard, it feels like using the app that's not designed for you might not actually be a good thing for you to do, even if you're doing it for the common good. Just trying to I'll use it loads, and then they'll know that it's different. Also because I guess if a minority of people are doing that, then you're just going to get these kind of outlying dots that they can ignore, and then they'll just kind of use the main data instead. But
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking, like, what can we do as like individuals, and I'm frustrated by it, but I also get scared by it. But I want to sort of input to other cultures, but I don't know what the answer is.
no.
I think there is a lot of activism going on that you can get involved in. There's a lot of pressure now on companies, and a lot more people talking about it and also a lot of this, is poor. It's just poor design. I think poor design choices. I think I would be much more likely to engage with a fitness app that track my menstrual cycle, because that's obviously something that affects me every month. And also Google Maps sending you to walk through parks at night and stuff like that. And there's a lot of possibility there. So I do think it is kind of about because I think if you're trying to work within an existing framework, that framework isn't going to change until someone starts to question the framework. And then so by putting pressure on the companies. And then the data is really hard, I think, because our data is sort of commercialised, and our data is sold and exchanged. And I think that everything you use is kind of a transaction, and you have to kind of question the benefit from it. But then also the fact that some data then, I saw a really interesting talk at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying they were interested in genealogy, so sort of gave their data to find out if they were descended from Vikings or something. But then they found out that data set had been, or that company had been bought by a big pharmaceutical company in America, and they were very much against that, and that actually pharmaceutical company affected the fact that when someone in their family had cancer and there was a shortage of the drugs, they hiked the price of the drugs up. Right, so she had a direct problem with that company, but the data's been sold. So her data then becomes... So it's all of this stuff is absolutely transactional. We just have to try and make good decisions based on our knowledge and understanding, and part of that is raising awareness, creating new knowledge and understanding, and talking about it, and talking about your concerns as well. Even if you just talk about your concerns to people that you know, they might start to question some of these things too, because part of the problem, and I think going back to the start of the panel, is it's all sort of hidden from us. We're not really, and even with your cookies agreement on your website, it's not as if it's really clear in the first sentence what's going on. A lot of people just accept it. So yeah, it tracks back to that, but to just think about everyone as a transaction and to ask those questions. But the data one's really hard.
Okay, we've got time for one more short question, so...
Hey, thank you very much, it was great. It's a kind of a bit of a provocation, but I wonder, how do you think we can kind of reconcile, being in this country, doing these kind of progressive things with technology, with where the raw materials of the things we use come from, and who creates the tools to profits from them? It's kind of interesting.
It's quite a big question. Everyone got a quick answer to that.
There are a few academics working in that space. I'm trying to remember his name, and I'll look it up and I'll say if you haven't heard of him. And he maps the whole cycle from the point at which, you know, a phone is built right the way through, and that's really interesting in terms of the mineral uses. And then there's been other ones. I can't remember her name. I have a terrible memory. And she, a woman, and she calculates the wattage of looking something up on Amazon and stuff like that. And that's one of our a project that's sort of coming that we're developing at the moment with a place in Cornwall, is thinking about the cloud, because that's the other thing. And the reason that this is all possible is the processing power of the cloud. But the cloud, much in the same way as AI, sounds like, oh, the cloud, or what is that? But what the cloud really is servers placed around the world, and also in terms of artwork. There's been some really famous AI artworks that people have tried to calculate how much energy that was used, and there's quite a famous one that uses the amount of energy used by a car in its lifetime for an artwork. And it was so users, if anyone does this sort of thing, really question if you're using Amazon servers, because Amazon are the worst in terms of sustainability. Well, the worst of the big ones in terms of sustainability. So yeah, absolutely, beyond the stuff that we're grappling with, you know, and a lot of the rest of the world is producing the raw materials for our use in the way that we interface with these technologies, but also will have the biggest impact from climate change as we stream more video from Amazon, as we use machine learning, as we use more facial recognition, as these systems become part of everyday lives, that they will be effective first before we are, which is amazingly unfair.
I think we better close there. But yeah, thanks to Shelly, to Coral, and to Leila.
Thank you.
And if you can fill out those forms, this panel is funded in order to help you be more productive through the topic of AI and data. I think we might have undermined that purpose slightly, so feel free to answer these questions anyway. You feel in an honest way. Yeah.
Do you have any pens? Or
I've got a couple of pens. Yeah.
Oh no, it's fine. I sent
around 5 minutes break, and then Lydia Jack will talk about live coding visuals with Hydra. Ray!
Sorry.